In this video, I want to give a short summary of the content that I plan to cover in this channel. Let's start by giving a very high-level summary of what I plan to go over. We'll start by discussing what the Bible actually contains, meaning the books, the genres, and the overall structure of the Bible. Then discuss the history behind the Bible and how we have the text that we have today. That will include going over a short summary of the history of biblical scholarship as well, wherein we will discuss the traditional and scholarly opinions on who wrote the text, when it was written, and other such topics. As usual, I'll also discuss what all of this means for Muslims. For example, if Moses didn't actually write the Torah that we have today, what can we take away from this as Muslims? One of the goals here will be to use the Quran to reconstruct the process in which the Israelites recorded their history and literature. As it will be discussed later, the Bible is actually a composite text with many different authors and editors. Knowing this, what can we as Muslims learn about the older revelations that are mentioned by God? For example, if we have two conflicting stories about Joseph within the biblical text, which one does the Quran follow, if either one of them? And what could this mean for how these ancient authors were sourcing their materials? Perhaps we can discover how the original Torah evolved and resulted in what we have today. This can shed light onto the Quran's critique of how the older scriptures were changed. But this also raises some interesting questions as to the Quran's overall ambivalence towards the older scriptures. For example, in Surah 5, verse 68, when it says, quote, "O followers of the book, that is, Jews and Christians, you follow no good till you keep up with the Torah and the Injil and that which is revealed to you from your Lord." End quote. And this leads to the next point of discussion, the Quran's understanding of the previous scriptures. What were they, and how do they relate to the Bible that you can pick up from your local bookstore today? After going over the history behind the authorship of the Bible, we're going to cover the history of Israel, not the modern state of Israel, which aside from sharing the same name has little to do with the ancient nation. Rather, we'll be tracing the story of what the Quran calls Bani Israel, that is, the children of Israel, from Adam all the way down to Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses. That is, Adam, Ibrahim, Yaqub, Yusuf, and Musa. Peace be upon them all. From there, we enter the conquest of the Promised Land under Joshua, the successor of Moses. This is a period that isn't referred to in the Quran, and we'll see why that's important historically. After that, we have the pre-regal period, a time after Moses and Joshua when the 12 tribes of Israel had settled down in the Promised Land and were ruled by what the Bible calls judges, essentially tribal chiefs. This again is a period which the Quran doesn't really engage with, so it's mostly all new information for Muslims. After that, we have the establishment of the kings, starting with Saul, then David, and Solomon, peace be upon them all. From there, we have the divided kingdom of Israel up north and Judah in the south. Then the destruction of Israel, followed by Judah in 587 BCE. Then a brief but very important period for the authorship of the Bible, that is, life within Babylonian captivity. From there we have the return from exile under the Persian king Cyrus, about 50 years later, and then from there we have a series of foreign rulers, Persians, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids. After that, we look at the brief period of Jewish self-rule under the Maccabees. This again is a pivotal time for Jewish history that is not covered anywhere in the Quran, aside from perhaps a brief mention of it at the start of the 17th Surah, that is Surah Al-Isra, which is also called Bani Israel. Following this, we look at what happens under Roman rule, during which time we have the prophets Zechariah, Yahya, and Isa. That is, Zechariah, John the Baptist, and Jesus, peace be upon them all. In order to understand the birth of Christianity and the world that Islam was born into, we continue on and look at the Jewish revolt against Rome in the year 67, which resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem. And then, one final revolt in the year 135, after which Jews were barred from entering Jerusalem, until Muslims took control of Jerusalem about 500 years later. Only then were Jews finally allowed to resettle in the area again. With this, we reach the end of biblical Judaism, and what follows is the rise of Christianity and Islam several centuries later. Interspersed with all of this history, I'll be making commentary on the subjects from a Muslim point of view, like what do we know about these stories from a historical sense, and discuss differences between the Quranic and biblical narratives, the major ones and the subtle ones as well. Now, much of what is going to be covered here you can read about in secular works on the Bible, but the difference here is that we'll be examining everything through a Muslim lens. You see, the Quran is never used or discussed within such works, and nor should it, since these are secular academic works. But on the other side, we have books written by Jews and Christians, who obviously don't reflect on the Quran. So this leaves a large and unfortunate void for any Muslim seeking to understand the Bible. This is because the conclusions that are just drawn from the existing body of work tend to be either very dismissive of biblical narratives or bend over backwards trying to justify the validity and the historicity of the events as described in the Bible. This happens because we generally only have the two viewpoints involved within this field. One is the atheist or agnostic author, oftentimes coming from a Jewish or Christian background. In the other camp, we have Jewish and Christian scholars who are very religious. Now, that's not to say that their works are unreliable. To the contrary, these are all extremely brilliant and well-accomplished individuals who have spent their lives studying the biblical text. They're often professors within prestigious universities who are involved in archaeological fieldwork, published several books, and have learned the languages that the original texts were written in, such as Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Syriac, Coptic, and even German, since Germany has been a hub of biblical scholarship. However, at the end of the day, everyone carries their own biases, and this is an inescapable reality. I think as Muslims, we sit in the middle of these two camps. While we acknowledge that certain characters or events described in the Bible did exist, we don't have to tie ourselves into knots trying to maintain biblical accuracy when archaeology and other research provides clear evidence against it. Nor do we have to be completely dismissive. For example, did the Exodus really happen? And if so, did it really involve millions of people, as conservatives claim? Or did Jesus actually say everything recorded in the Gospels, as conservative authors claim? And if not, was he just a failed Messiah who believed that the world would end within his own lifetime, as scholarship concludes? These are just two examples of many where Muslims can come to different conclusions, not by simply claiming that it's the truth from the Quran, rather by looking at the evidence with a different set of eyes. You see, biblical history is not only sacred for Jews and Christians. It is also important for Muslims, since it's the story and history of all of the Hebrew prophets that are mentioned in the Quran. This is our heritage as well, and we should embrace it. As Allah recounts in the Quran, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ إِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ كُلًّا هَدَيْنَا وَنُوحًا هَدَيْنَا مِن قَبْلُ وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِ دَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ وَأَيُّوبَ وَيُوسُفَ وَمُوسَى وَهَارُونَ وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And we gave him Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each of them we guided. And we guided Noah previously, and from his descendants David and Solomon, and Job and Joseph, and Moses and Aaron. Thus we reward the righteous. وَزَكَرِيَّا وَيَحْيَى وَعِيسَى وَإِلْيَاسَ كُلٌّ مِّنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And Zechariah and John, and Jesus and Elijah, every one of them was of the upright. وإسماعيل واليسع ويونس ولوطا وكلا فضلنا على العالمين. And Ishmael and Elisha and Jonah and Lot, and we favored each one of them over all other people. ومن آبائهم وذرياتهم وإخوانهم وجتبيناهم وهديناهم إلى صراط مستقيم. And of their ancestors and their descendants and their siblings we chose them and guided them to a straight path. So let's keep in mind that the stories and teachings of all of these prophets who were just mentioned had already been cherished within the Bible for more than 1,000 years prior to Islam. Also, there is something very interesting to note here. Take a look at how these prophets are grouped together in these verses. It isn't in alphabetical or even chronological order. and at first sight it seems a bit random. But actually, these groupings are very cleverly structured and are based on certain shared themes and struggles within the lives of these prophets. To actually understand this, you would have to refer back to the Bible to find out their stories. Certainly of Elijah, Elisha, John, and Job, whose lives and missions are mostly absent from the Quran. To go into detail would be out of scope for this introduction, but I'll return to this in a later video, God willing. But for now, let's just recognize that we have to refer back to the Bible to find out the full stories of these prophets. So I hope we can grow to be more active within this field because we have much to learn and a unique perspective to offer. Continuing on, I plan to go through all the books within the Bible and give their overviews, with each of these discussing them from a devotional and academic perspective. That is, their themes, messages, and what we can say about their historical composition and what they meant within the context of their own time. And of course, offer commentary as a Muslim. I also plan to review books, mostly academic works relating to the Bible, Judaism, and Christianity, but also books by Christian and Jewish authors, to give an insight into what they're saying. Also some short videos reflecting on various passages from the Quran. So please like and subscribe as we go through and read the Bible as a Muslim.